much as possible. But this time round, we did not have. So we are going to have our panelists as gentlemen today. Then for the general public, I want to thank you very much also for having the opportunity, taken time off to be with us. The interpretation services are there. Most of the presentations will be in English. We also have one French presentations. We request our participants to always mute their system so that we don't interfere as much. We have the chat box, and we encourage the delegates, the experts, if you have something to express, please use the chat box. And always, we are going to share the presentations thereafter. We want to inform you that with the cooperation with one of our stakeholders, the Association of African Universities, they will be streaming this presentations and the event live in their AAU TV. This is very important for us and also for Africa. You know, the African Union has declared this year, 2024, as year of education. Educate an African who is fit for the 21st century challenges. So we are looking forward to this, and the recordings will be shared accordingly. So we want to welcome you once more and thank you. At this particular point, I will give our technical director, Mr. Ruben Gisore, the opportunity to highlight the background information to this webinar before we open it up to our stakeholders, the panelists who are here. Thank you very much, and we look forward to a great webinar. Thank you. I will be the moderator for today's webinar on behalf of the ASO Central Secretariat. Thank you. Mr. Ruben, please.
Thank you very much, Philip. And let me also take this opportunity to welcome our stakeholders to this webinar. We really appreciate your being present, and we look forward to your participation through the chat boxes as you may, so that you're able to comment and you're able to become our ambassadors in terms of the information that we pass through in this webinar series. Today we are dealing with an important subject that I think you may look at as one of the frontiers that is remaining to be conquered in terms of market access. And when I say that, it means that this is the frontier that usually would be seen as one where the goalposts keep moving, or is a moving target kind of frontier. So why we say that is that, you know, when we talk of standards, they are being developed continually. And when we talk of technical regulations, they are also being developed continually. Now, the challenge is that they may look like deliberate problems, but in actual fact, these are those issues that we say they are important for society, but the way they are done is perhaps the way that will cause a problem to us. So when you look at it, let's not move fast. When we look at it, we are looking in terms of why do we need standards, and what do the standards do that is essential for trade. So when we look at the technical issues that affect trade, we have the technical measures, which include the product-specific requirements, such as tolerances, limits of certain substances, you know, measurements, labeling standards, and such. This can impact the way you can market your products. Then we have the sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which cover standards and procedures to protect human health and all plant life. And you know, I'm ensuring that you do not transfer pests, diseases, and additives that are toxic from one part of the continent or to the other, or one country to the other. And then we have the technical barriers to trade. The technical barriers to trade is where you have standards and technical regulations and conformity assessment, which would necessarily be useful in terms of ensuring that the products meet the quality and safety requirements. But if they are not uniform, if they are not predictable, if they are done in a manner that is not transparent, then they also create barriers. Then we have the non-technical barriers. The non-technical barriers would include the charges or duties, taxes, and other para-tariff measures that countries impose on goods and services. Then there are also quantitative measures, such that those that you want to protect your country by ensuring that you do not get an influx of goods, which would overwhelm the market and perhaps cause a glut that affects the prices and maybe it makes the local products unmarketable. Then you have other issues like pre-shipment inspections, which from the trader's perspective means that they have to get their products inspected and certified before they are shipped. So sometimes there are traders who are like small traders may find that this is a problem. Then there are also rules of origin, which prescribe if a country is to claim that they are making this product in their country and they are subject to preferential treatment in terms of trade access, can we be sure that they actually did this? There are percentages which are attached to that. And then there are financial measures where you have issues of insurances, exchange rate regulations and price controls. These are also
recording in progress,
which can cause challenges in terms of market access. So when you look at all these things, they're in terms of trade, they look okay. But when you look at in terms of the market access, they're actually seen as barriers. Although, people need to meet them, but they are seen as barriers. Next. Yeah. So who are the players in terms of technical standards and technical regulations? This is where we look at when we now have to look at the quality infrastructure in a country. We have all these facilities. For example, the national standards bodies, the National Accreditation Body, the National Metrology Institute, the Quality Assurance and Market Surveillance, and then we adopted a coherent quality policy at the national level. So this is what we need. We need this, and in any country that doesn't have the quality infrastructure, nothing really works very well. And that's why we say that quality infrastructure is not everything, but everything without quality infrastructure is nothing. So to the point where we're saying you need to have a system by which you can verify that the goods and services that you're receiving in your country meet certain specific requirements that make it worthwhile to engage or to pay for. So if you don't have that coherent quality policy in place, then it also means that anything can come to your country. And this is one of the challenges that we are facing in this continent, that some countries have the quality infrastructure in place, some countries don't have it, or they have the quality infrastructure, but it is not coherent. So you find that there are many players who are working in cross purposes. They are not coherent in the way they are approaching issues. So in coming up with the technical regulations, we see that the field in the continent is fragmented, and this is where the challenge comes in. So that there are those technical institutions which come up with these aspects of technical regulations, and they find that they are either contravening what is accepted by other institutions, or they are, duplicating what is there. And sometimes this is the challenge. Next. So a standard is simple. In defining standards, we say it's a document, and mostly this is what it is, unless you're talking about metrology standards. In terms of standards, a document which provides, among others, requirements, rules, and guidelines for a process, product, or service. These requirements are sometimes complemented by a description of the process, product, or service. The standards come out through a consensus process, and this is why you have to make a very perfect distinction that stakeholders come together, they make a standard, and it's approved by a recognized body. In most of the countries, you have one standards body, and the rules of the game are that you cannot have two standards bodies representing a country, so it has to be one standards body. And the aim is to achieve a maximum degree of order in a given context. So when you do this is a process of standardization. So the people who develop standards are experts and their stakeholders. So you have a wide range of stakeholders, including the consumers themselves, the research institutions, regulators, the standards body experts, and all those. In terms of the ISO IEC definition, basically that is what it covers. In the TBT agreement of 1995, it says it's an it's a document approved by recognized body that provides for common and repeated use. When we say repeated use, is if you are producing chocolate, for example, the standard does not change when you are doing the next batch of products. It is the same standard that you use, and for all the batches before the standard is revised, is the same standard that you shall be using. So you don't change it because you are producing a different batch of products. Next. So there are significant levels of standardization that we can talk of, and I will say, first, we expect that even at the company level, and this is one of the most important things that we are not doing very well currently in the continent. Standards can start from the company level. And company level means it can be a government department, project authorities, it can be institutions and municipalities. You can have standards at that level, that you have processes that ensure that whatever service you provide, whatever goods you produce, they follow certain standards. And then from there, you have industry. Beyond the company level, you have the industry level. So if it's an industry that produces, say, steel, they can agree that this is the standard we are going to use for steel. And therefore, countrywide, in a given context, and this is how standards actually started with the industry associations developing standards, particularly steel. So that company, that industry can do that. And it does that not just within a country, it can do that across many countries. For example, in Europe, this was a European initiative for companies in Europe coming together to produce steel within given standards. And then, of course, it led to the European Union at the end of the day. Then we have the national standard level, where now you use the national standards body, which we call the NSB. And the national standard body produces what we call national standards. So if it is a national standards body in Kenya, they produce what we call Kenya standards. If it is a national standards body in South Africa, they will produce what we call South Africa national standards, not something like that organization are producing the standard for themselves. Then we have regional organizations like the European Committee for Standardization, which deals with the called CENLEC. And then we have the Pan-American Commission, COPANT, producing standards at that level. Then we have the African Organization for Standardization, which produces standards for Africa. So they are called African standards. Then at the international level, you have those bodies like the International Organization for Standardization. We have the International Electrotechnical Commission. We have the International Telecommunications Union producing international standards in their specific areas. So those are the areas that we have, the levels of standardization that we have globally. Next. So when we talk of the TBTs, the technical regulations, essentially we are looking at those that are considered under the WTO TBT agreement. They are considered as necessary instruments to protect life, to protect the environment, to protect the citizens from fraud or from harm, and to ensure that we are protecting the environment. So how do we go about it? There are principles that have been set out. The openness that members who are able can participate, those who have an interest can participate. Then there's effectiveness and relevance of the standards. Are they effective? Can they be used to respond to regulation? Can they be used to respond to society needs? So, and then there's coherence, ensuring that if we have various bodies making the standards in the same area, can we ensure that we do one standard? We don't have overlapping standards. So that's the coherence principle. Then we have impartiality and consensus. So whoever you are, whether you are a big company or a small company, you're a small country, you're a big country, powerful, whichever way you are, we don't really take that into account. It is that reason must prevail, impartiality must prevail. Then we have the development dimension that looks at if it is within the African context. We are looking at how do we ensure that all the countries participate. So we must look for resources to ensure that all the countries participate and they are able to give their views without being left behind because they were not able probably to send their experts to a meeting. So you have to look for ways of ensuring that they do that. Over that, we have to look at the standard as a developmental instrument. Does it facilitate development in any given context? Thank you. Then we go next. I want to wind up by showing you the simple steps that we take in developing standards. And this is a rigorous process, which I think we might have to repeat a presentation at some point, that you start with an idea. When you start with an idea, we look at what is the context within which countries are existing currently. Now, if it is an issue, for example, when it rains this flooding in our towns, what does that mean? It means we need standards for drainage, for storm waters to be carried out away from the roads. So that is a need we have identified. It's a preliminary issue. So you have not yet started developing the standard, but you have identified that there is need for that to be done. So when you've that need identified, you need to search for information to see what exactly can we do. Then you develop a proposal that you need to develop this standard. You give reasons, you give references, and then you start saying we can do it and we can do it within a certain time. We have people interested in this. We have resources, we have the expertise to do it. Then we can now start moving forward. You give a proposal. Then from there, you go to the preparatory stage, you gather your experts, and then you can start developing the preliminary documents, or you develop a working draft that becomes a document you discuss, seeing that you have addressed the problems or not yet. Then once you have done that at the expert level, you circulate it to the national level, committee stage. And then here, the inputs you get, if it is countries participating, they are 5, they are 10, or they are 15, then they will tell you, okay, this standard is okay or it's not okay. We need to improve it this way. So we discuss at committee level. Once that is done, then you open it up to the public, because you cannot have in the committee, 30 million people. You can open up a public review to anybody else who may want to participate. That's the inquiry stage. Then approval stage, once everything has been agreed on, we have a level of consensus. Perhaps like 75% of the people have said, this is a good document. We can use it to improve the situation of our roads. We can eliminate flooding in our roads. Then you can develop that standard. Then at the end of it, once it is approved by an authority that is vested with the power to approve, it is published and circulated to everybody. Who can propose a standard in that context? We are saying it's anyone represented by the model we have, what we call the African Standards Harmonization Model. I don't want to go into a lot of details, but to say that in the context of world trade, technical barriers to trade, which originate from standards, which originate from technical regulations, are predominant in causing barriers to trade. So let's listen to the panelists so that they can give us views from their experiences on how these issues are handled, what experiences they have, and how we can make Africa better in terms of ensuring that our standards and technical regulations do not continue to be barriers to trade, where we need trade to develop our continent. I hand over to you, Philip, so that you can continue the moderation with the experts and we listen to their valuable contributions to this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ruben, for giving that background information. As we talked about, the issue here is about standards and technical regulations. These other sections, we are going to hear it from our panelists, the technical regulations, reference to standards, the methods of reference. These ones are very key, some of the key areas that it is involved. So we will give the opportunity to the panelists to highlight the differences, some kind of equivalences, or where they meet. We are going to hear all of this when we open up now in the plenary session. We see the FCFTA has also taken after the WTO TBT agreement and say it is going to be the guiding principle in the African regulatory framework. The webinar is just to open up a platform for discussions, make references, and also to hear from different stakeholders what standards and technical regulations are, the best practices for making and preparing them, and also for enforcing them. Our opportunity, I've got my two seniors, the Secretary General, who is the host today. These are the credentials of the Secretary General. Is so much experience in quality infrastructure issues, standardization activities, and one of the key pillars in facilitating the African standardization agenda. We have Mr. Ruben Gisore, who has also been the technical director, who has given us the background information, joined us since 2012. And currently, Mr. Ruben Gisore is the one who is in charge of the technical activities in standards development and harmonization. And he has given us that bit, including the ASHAM, the ASHAM model, which is based in ISO, the WTO TBT agreements in the development of standards and technical regulations, plus conformity assessment. Finally, now we get into the plenary session, and we have our first panelist who is going to give us the first presentation, Dr. Karl Christian Gottner, who is an international consultant, and you can see it has been in Latin America, Africa, and even the post-Soviet countries, and in an expert in regulation and quality infrastructure. He's an international consultant and with a lot of experience in implementing services for the SMEs in Latin America, Africa, and post-Soviet countries. This is since 1993. He worked with the PTB advising upgrading of meteorological services and national quality infrastructure. He has also experiences in regional projects, for instance, energy efficiency. We have been covering a lot of renewable energy, especially also in Africa. In the case of the OECD Development Center, he performs as a peer reviewer for quality infrastructure for the productive transformation policy reviews in such countries that we have highlighted, and we are glad that he's come across the challenges of African regulatory systems in Egypt and Togo. He supports the elaboration of PTB-OCB study on interrelations between regulation and quality infrastructure. He holds a PhD in economy of Latin America. He's going to cover the subject of understanding standards and technical regulations as components of quality infrastructure and their interrelations, the influence of quality infrastructure components in the elaboration, implementation, and monitoring of technical regulations and lessons for Africa under the FCFTA. Dr. Karl, it's our pleasure to have you, and we give you the platform to share your experience with the delegates. Thank you very much and welcome. You can share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. You can see my presentation?
Yes, I can confirm.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. My presentation will have a focus on quality infrastructure services for technical regulations. Well, as already was said, I had some experience, especially in Latin America, and also with some in a study which we are now organizing together with the OECD Regulatory Policy Committee. Beginning with national quality infrastructure, so we have three main pillars, which are metrology with the National Institute of Metrology, standardization, the national standardization body, and accreditation with the national accreditation body. And they are giving or supporting the conformity assessment bodies, which are especially testing laboratories, certification bodies, and inspections. And we have the clients, which are regulators, industry, market surveillance and control, research and development and innovation institutions, consumer and environment protection organizations, and consumers. Well, and we are now speaking on regulators, which are, well, seeing from the national quality infrastructure, one of the most important clients of a national quality infrastructure. So it was already explained. We have standards which are consensus-based and elaborated by the interested parties, what are formalized documentation that contains the requirements with which a product, process, or service has to be compliant, and the principles were also already explained. The main point is that standards normally are voluntary. And now we have also a tendency to digitalize standards, to develop smart standards in which are working ISO IEC, Senelec, and also the German deal. On the other side, we have regulations which are elaborated by regulatory authorities. Technical regulations are mandatory. The fundamentals are international agreements and orientations, economic, social goals by national policy, safety, health, and environmental protection. And we have also technical fundamentals, which are the international or national standards, risk analysis, and regulatory impact assessment. Well, the definition is these are the minimal requirements with which a product, process, service has to be compliant, ensuring safety, health of persons, animals, plants, and environmental protection. And regulations are monitored, controlled, and sanctioned. And this is mandatory. If we look how are the relationship, then on one side we have the national quality infrastructure with the National Metrology Institute, which is assuring the traceability to the international system of units, and that is giving traceability, measurement, and testing methods to the conformity assessment bodies. We have the national standard body, which has the standards which are voluntary, and giving the standards to the National Metrology Institute, to the conformity assessment bodies, and to the national accreditation body. And sure, they are working together with the international standardization organizations like IEC, ISO, ITU, and other organizations. And we have accreditation, which is working together with ILAC, IFF, and which are giving the accreditation to the conformity assessment bodies. The other point are technical regulations. There we have international agreements. We have TBD, SPS agreement with the World Trade Organizations. We have Sustainable Development Goals and other things. We have here the African Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, and these are, say, the inputs for national politics. And on this base, the national governments are developing the national development plans, are giving national goals and priorities, which are the base for technical regulation. And at least if we take the national and international, and also the implementation of technical regulations, inspections, market surveys, and control are things which are assured by, especially by the conformity assessment bodies. If we look on the process of development of regulation, then we see that the participation of national quality infrastructure in the elaboration, implementation, and evaluation of such regulations is necessary. We made an exercise now in Colombia, where we defined that it's necessary that the national three main pillars, that is National Metrology Institute, National Accreditation Body, and National Standardization Body, are participating in the elaboration and in the implementation and evaluation of technical regulations, that is especially in the regulatory impact assessment and risk analysis as base for the development of the regulation, in the planification of the regulatory project, in the reduction of the content, and also in the adjustment of the public consultation. And it's also necessary that they are participating or giving their services for inspection, market surveys, and control, and ex post evaluation. What is necessary, that is the national quality infrastructure institutions provide information to the regulators, especially what are the existing national and international standards. This is by the National Standardization Body. What are the existing measurement standards, including reference materials and their scope, done by the National Metrology Institute, and what are the technical competences of the existing conformity assessment bodies, and are they accredited in information by the National Accreditation Body. And last not least, if we are looking especially in the right, then it's also necessary a contribution of these institutions to the cost-benefit analysis, because at least upgrading the national quality infrastructure is costly, and it has to be considered if you do it within in the country, or it is better to take the services from outside of the country. What are the contributions to the implementation? One is upgrading the national and international standards. In many cases, which I know, the standards are not upgraded, and so if you are introducing the regulation, the standards have to be upgraded. Also, the same as upgrading the measurement standards in the NMI. A very important point is improving the technical competences of the certification assessment bodies, in particular the laboratories. This is one of the main obstacles to implement efficiently technical regulations, so that the question is to upgrade equipment, to qualify the staff, introducing new testing methods. And it's also that the national quality infrastructure institutions know, but are recognized foreign conformity assessment bodies who can realize tests and realize also certification of products. There is a document which we have elaborated in Colombia for foodstuff, and which will be introduced in the next years. Now a concrete example for harmonization of standards and regulation in the case of the Central American integration. This is SICA. This is an integration system of 8 countries, 7 from Central America and 1 of the Caribbean. For the Caribbean, this is Dominican Republic. And they are also speaking 2 languages. 7 are speaking Spain, and Belize is speaking English. That's why the regulations have to be also in English and Spanish. It's interesting, they have no sub-regional QI system, but they have 2 basic regional regulations. One for measures of standardization, metrology, and authorization, and another on the regulation on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. This is the base for the regulations, for the harmonized regulations. The procedure is the following. First, each member state is developing a proposal, or the member states are developing proposals for harmonized regulations. This proposal will be approved by the Council of the Ministers of Economy, COMIECA. Then they give this back to the member states, and the officials of the member states are elaborating the proposal and the regulation, the draft of the regulation. Then this draft is going to national, regional, and international consultation. Afterwards, the adjusted regulation is approved by the Council of the Ministers of Economy once more, and the implementation is realized in the national context by each country. And what is also important is that the quality infrastructure institutions which are existing in the different countries are working together with the officials of the member states, so that the questions of quality infrastructure are also considered in the elaboration of these regulations. What are the experience and lessons learned in this process? The first is that the competent national authorities understood that harmonized regional technical regulations could be an instrument to foster the economic integration of Central America. An important driver were the interest of national industry to amplify the markets for their products, for scale effects of production by overcoming technical barriers to trade within the region or sub-region, and improving their competitiveness in comparison with international providers. The other is the countries are different, and the interest too, that is harmonized regulations need consensus between the partners, and so that especially the regulations are for foodstuff, pharmaceuticals, hydrocarbons, cables, but only for the few electrical household devices. In general, at the moment, we have 75 harmonized technical regulations. The products which are traded in the market needs certificates that are edited by accredited testing laboratories and certification bodies. The other point is the harmonized regulations are applied with a certain flexibility. Thus, Panama has not approved some of the technical regulations and does not apply it, and Costa Rica does not apply one of the regulations. That is, like I already said, it depends on the approval by each country. And the other point is, starting with a long period of elaboration, 6-7 years, the experience and the new technologies like digitalization allow to shorten the elaboration in time to 1 year. This is very impressionating, and I would like to subline it here. Well, what are the experiences by the Latin American and Caribbean countries? First is that regulations need QI services for being developed and implemented efficiently and transparently. Second, regulation should be based on international, eventual adjusted standards. Third, the weakest point are the conformity assessment procedures and conformity assessment bodies, in particular the lack of technical competences of the labs, the testing labs, and the traceability of measurements should be assured. The demand for QI service for implementing technical regulations should be considered from the very beginning of the elaboration of regulations. That means the regulatory impact assessment, which is beginning the process. The use of quality infrastructure for technical regulation needs regional and international cooperation. And what is urgently necessary is the creation of awareness between regulators and governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karl, for that impressive and insightful presentation and contributions. We have noted with a lot of gratefulness the presentation, highlighting the differences between standards, technical regulations, the process of making the technical regulations, including what is very important, risk impact assessment, and also how national quality infrastructure and generally quality infrastructure contributes in the development of technical regulations and in reference to also development of standards, and also the lessons that have been learned. And I think this one is drawing our attention, and this one will be our next webinar on conformity assessment and combining it with the accreditation, how they go hand in hand. Thank you very much. I had two questions for you, but for now, I've seen the last one you have answered very well in the presentation, how national quality policy, how national quality infrastructure and quality infrastructure generally aids in the formulation, development, preparation, and enforcement of technical regulations. I still just wanted to highlight one question for you, why standardization seems still also to be the most pillar or the cornerstone of quality infrastructure. If you can just give us a word or two on this, why standardization still is a pillar or a cornerstone of quality infrastructure. Then after that, we'll go to the second panelist. Thank you very much. If you can quickly make a presentation on this. Thank you and welcome.
Yeah, well, standards are linked practically to all the quality infrastructure, that is to methodology and also to accreditation and also to the laboratories. And so the standards are very important also for regulation. And it's necessary that regulatory authorities are basing their regulations on standards, because the standards also define normally a lot of the methodology and testing requirements. So at the moment we are working, developing a new standard on steel and construction materials, and this is so that all the points of testing and characteristics of the product are included in the standard, so that the standard is very important for the development of the regulation. And what was also my experience in Latin America, that sometimes the regulation authorities didn't know very well what are the standards and had no relationship with no contact, so no permanent contacts with the standardization bodies. So that I think this is a very important point, because standards are one of the of the main pillars of regulation. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karl, for that explanation. Yes, ensuring that all the systems are fit for their purposes, the role of a standard, and also with reference to technical regulation. Thank you very much. We are going to have our second panelist in this plenary session. Our second panelist is Mr. Bia Budo, who is going to give us a presentation and discussions also in a short while. Mr. Bia Budo is a PTB consultant of upgrading of quality infrastructure in Africa. He's a Mauritian national and has worked in the private sector, especially in the food and pharmaceutical industries. These are very key sectors for Africa's industrialization. Then he joined the government sector and occupied the following posts: Deputy Director at the Mauritius Standards Bureau, Deputy Director in the Mauritian Department of Environment, Director of Mauritius Accreditation Service. He has conducted technical assistant projects in Africa, that's with UNEP and UNIDO. He also joined ISO as a Director of the Development and Training Services, which means he has climbed the ladder from the national perspective to the international perspective. And he is now having several technical assistant projects for UNIDO, PTP, and other agencies in the area of quality infrastructure in policy. Recall our last webinar on regulations and policy formulations and the use of standards. He's currently freelance consultant for PTB, intervening occasionally to support the latest project entitled Upgrading of Quality Infrastructure in Africa, the project which is being taken by UNIDO for the ACP countries, including Africa. He holds a postgraduate degree in analytical chemistry from France. He also holds graduate certification in environmental management from the University of Adelaide, Australia. He's chartered chemist and member of the Royal Society. He's going to give us a presentation and discussion on the topics: standards and technical regulations defined, the differences and interdependence and methods for referencing standards in technical regulations, and implication as trade barriers for international trade and competitiveness of exporters. Lessons for Africa under the FCFTA in promoting regulatory cooperation and regulatory convergence. Mr. Budo, thank you very much, and we give you the floor for this leading this discussion under the topic. Thank you and welcome, and you can share your screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip, for this introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants. It's a pleasure to be among you again to share some of the things that we are doing in Africa, which is quite interesting. A lot of things happening. So I'll try to emphasize this a bit in the presentation that I'm going to do now. So just bear with me. I'll share my screen. All right, so I hope you can see the screen. So I'll be talking about referencing standards in technical regulations, and I think even the WTO has recognized that that using standards in technical regulations is the best way to achieve regulatory harmonization. So I think it's very, very important. And it is something that is a very, very important tool for us to be able to use when we are looking at technical regulations. And in Africa, when we are looking at technical regulations, we have so many countries, we have so many regional economic communities. Some regional economic communities do draft technical regulations, like the EAC. ECOWAS has a guide on technical regulations and so on. So I think much work is being done. And I think the objective of the Africa Quality Policy And one of the focus areas of the Africa Quality Policy is looking at a continental technical regulatory framework to put all this together. So very, very interesting work that is going on now. Actually, the African Continental Technical Regulatory Framework, ACTREF, is going to be tabled for next month meeting of the Specialized Technical Committee on Tourism, Trade, Industry, and Minerals. So the ministers are going to probably, if everything goes well, approve the continental framework, and from there on, it will be under implementation under the AQP program. So as an introduction, so I'm not going to go into the definition of the standard. It has already been mentioned quite extensively by my predecessors. I just, again, just highlight that the ISO Guide 2 definition is at a document that is established by consensus and recognized by the recognized body. TBT agreement, on the other hand, also covers documents that are called standards, but that are not based on consensus. So this is something to note. And the TBT makes it clear in the TBT agreement that standards are voluntary and technical regulations are mandatory. Now, the technical regulation, again, ISO Guide 2 doesn't define technical regulation, but it points that standards can be used instead of detailed provisions in the drafting of regulation. And TBT agreement, of course, say that compliance with technical regulation is mandatory. Now, the TBT is the highest level instrument internationally that is driving technical regulations. So I think it's good to start with them to see what these drivers are. And in Article 2.2 of the TBT agreement, members shall ensure that technical regulations do not create unnecessary obstacles to trade. Where technical regulations are required, relevant international standards, if they exist, shall be used by members. So it's mandatory for members to use them if these standards are there, or relevant parts of them, except when such international standards don't apply to them, is not suitable for them. So there are exceptions. So you have to know this as well. Now, the TBT also say that if technical regulations are drafted in accordance with relevant international standards, it should be presumed not to create obstacles to trade. And technical regulations should be based on product requirements in terms of performance rather than design and descriptive characteristics. This has a direct impact on the type of standards that have to be developed because of this last requirement from the TBT. Now, in Africa, we've got the AFCFTA agreement, the Annex 6, which is about the TBTs. And in the definitions, it says that the AFCFTA shall have the meaning, for definitions, it shall have the same meaning given under the TBT agreement and other international bodies. So AFCFTA aligns with the TBT in terms of definitions. And the scope of the AFCFTA, state parties reaffirm the rights and obligations under the WTO TBT agreement. And in the objectives of the AFCFTA, it talks about promoting the use of relevant international standards. So promoting and incorporation in technical regulations in Article 7b, it says that state parties shall promote the use of international standards or parts thereof as a basis for technical regulations. It doesn't say that state parties shall use international standards, relevant international standards. So it says it shall promote the use. So it's kind of a bit weaker than the requirement in the TBT. So just to be noted. Now, as I said a bit earlier, excuse me. One of the focus areas of AQP is to prepare this technical regulatory framework, which is called ACTREF, and it is, as I said, being discussed next month by the ministers. It's supposed to be a continental system that establishes how technical regulations are developed, applied, and enforced on the continent. So there is this kind of an overall objective to say that the ACTREF will contribute towards bringing convergence on technical regulations within the African Union. And among the specific objectives is, while they are going towards bringing this convergence, the specific objective that to allow them to do that is to adopt good regulatory practices in developing and applying and enforcing technical regulations, to improve the convergence on technical regulations within AU member states and RECs as well. So it's not only AU member states, but RECs as well, to see how technical regulations within all these entities can, how should I say, converge to achieve the same objective. We'll come on the issue of objective a bit later. Now, the one of the other specific objective of the ACTREF is to set up a mechanism to designate priority products for the continent, and for those priority products, if there are technical regulations that are required for trade to happen, then the African Union, under the AQP implementation, will allocate resources to develop such regulations. So this is under the ACTREF, things that needs to be done. And in the ACTREF, the definition that we have adopted, the standard, the definition of standard is the same as the ISO definition, so consensus-based documents. The technical regulation definition is the same as in the TBT agreement. For the international standards, when TBT agreement talks about relevant international standards, the TBT agreement does not define international standard, neither does it define international standardization bodies which produce them. So this is a kind of a loophole. So it's not surprising in statistics from 2013, practically 1/3 of all the specific trade concerns that were raised at the WTO TBT committee are associated one way or another with international standards because of this lack of definition. So this is something that's not the end of it. It will continue to be a problem. So this is something that we need to tackle at the level of Africa to see how we deal with this. Now, as the AFCFTA agreement aligns with the TBT agreement definitions, it means that the AFCFTA does not define international standards. And of course, ACTREF cannot go further than the AFCFTA agreement. So it doesn't define international standards either. On the word relevant international standards, there is no, again, formal definition of the word relevant. What standards are considered to be relevant for Africa, relevant for Asia, or whatever. But there is a consensus that when we are talking about relevant international standards from the OECD documentation, there seems to emerge that the term includes relevance to the market and as well as relevance to the objectives of the regulator. So whatever the policy decision, the policy objective being pursued by the regulator, whatever they want to achieve in a given country, continent, or a REC, and the standard that will allow them to do that should be considered relevant for that purpose. So ACTREF is going to be used under the AFCFTA agreement as a tool to minimize TBTs. The AFCFTA Secretariat has been working very closely with the African Union Commission in the implementation of the Africa Quality Policy and the other policy areas coming out of the Africa Quality Policy, such as drafting of a technical regulatory framework. So on the ACTREF development, AFCFTA Secretariat has been working closely with the AUC, and actually the implementation of the ACTREF activities related to trade are going to be handled at the level of the AFCFTA Secretariat under guidance from the SCTBT. So if you wish, from the technical regulations point of view, that's where the Africa Quality Policy, which is looking at improving the quality infrastructure in Africa, links with a regulatory part, which is handled under the AFCFTA and Annex 6 TBT. So that's where the link is. So there is going to be close collaboration so that there is no duplication and so on between AQP activities and technical regulations that is necessary under AFCFTA. Now, the policies in the ACTREF, the policies, member states are encouraged to use international standards. And if there are no international standards, then they have to use also AFSEC, Harmonized African Standards, as basis for technical regulations. That's what ACTREF says. And if there is no international standards and no also AFSEC, Harmonized African Standards, then countries that wish to align the national standards so that they are referenced in technical regulations, they have to make efforts to align it among themselves. So it could be among a certain number of countries or within a regional economic community. So we are also looking at the possibility that if international standards don't exist and also standards don't exist or AFSEC standards don't exist, then how should people go and try to align standards that are referenced in technical regulations so that the technical regulations do not create obstacles to trade? Now, under the ACTREF as well, if there is a need to develop also AFSEC Harmonized African Standards, then resources will be put at their disposal, but as long as these standards are suitable as technical solutions. So this is another level of assessment that will have to be made. Does the standard provide the right technical solution to solve the issue? On the policy measures of ACTREF, EU member states, it is said that also an AFSEC will work with the AFCFTA subcommittee on technical barriers to trade to look at the harmonization needs that exist under the operation of the AFCFTA agreement. And it is also provided that there will be guidelines that will be developed under the Africa Quality Policy in the matter of referencing international standards or harmonized African standards when they are referencing technical regulations to referencing only what is needed to achieve the policy objective. This is very important. We'll not go into the detail for the time being, but for example, instead of referencing a whole standard, just referencing the essential part of that standard is going to be enough if it meets the desired objectives. Referencing a whole standard with requirements that are not needed to fulfill that desired objective just makes market surveillance and everything regarding implementation of the technical regulations so costly and complicated. So training materials are going to be developed and sort of organized for regulators about referencing standards in technical regulations. So I think while drafting the ACTREF, I think cognizance was taken that of the loopholes, of the gaps that exist in terms of how do we ensure that standards, do people understand standards and technical regulations, how they link and so on, and how each one can be strengthened by using, mainly how technical regulations are strengthened by making use of standards instead of regulators developing their own specifications themselves. Now, the methods of referencing international standards, I think the mechanics for referencing are well described in the ISO document that I have listed and the EU guide as well. So I won't go into it. It's just that you make direct references either with a dated standard or undated standard. And if you do that in the technical regulation, meaning that the standard becomes mandatory. And then you've got the indirect referencing, which recognizes the voluntary nature of the standard and lets the standard continue to be voluntary. Now, the issues in referencing, how does the, of course, when we are referencing, the legislator just makes reference to a standard, but how does the legislator ensure that the standards developer understands what the regulatory objective is and which is being pursued? How do they ensure that? So this is a problem. So it means that there has to be some linkages created there. In New Zealand, for example, whenever a standard is referenced in legislation, if the Standards Council wants to amend it, then it has to seek ministerial permission. The standards developer cannot themselves go on their own and develop a new standard while that standard is referenced in technical regulations. Now, just reference the whole standard or just parts of it. I have just covered that. And once the standards are referenced in technical regulations, how is the public going to have access to those standards referenced in law? Normally, when the law, every citizen has right to the law, the document, access to the law. So should these reference standards be provided free of charge as copies, or should they be on a read-only basis? When you go to the ministry that is managing the technical regulation, they should have it as a read-only basis for people to know. So people have access, but they don't have a copy in their hands. Now, we have talked about the word relevant international standards. So how in Africa are we going to see which international standards are relevant to be referenced in technical regulations? So there's a mechanism that is required there. And if there are international standards and that mechanism, after it assesses the situation, finds that the international standard is not relevant, so even if it is an international standard, it shouldn't be used in Africa. And then in that case, what do? You ask also AFSEC to develop African standards that is going to be fit for that purpose. Now, the challenges for regulatory convergence, as I said, the objective of ACTREF is to bring regulatory convergence on the whole of the continent. This practice of declaring standards as compulsory and enforcement by NSBs or RECs should be looked into. This is a kind of challenge. We know the situation exists. This is something that has to be tackled head on to see what should be done about this. Now, when countries have different technical regulations, and if they wish to achieve convergence, they have to look at converging on the regulatory objectives and not really at looking at the text of the technical regulations to try to make them similar and so on. It's not something that is easily done. It was done in the European Union and so on, but this is an exception. So I think if countries agree on the regulatory objectives and the outcomes that are needed, and if that objective and outcome is met by differing technical regulations, then there might be consideration to say that the technical regulations are equivalent. They're not the same, but they're equivalent. And again, technical regulations should achieve regulatory objectives aiming at performance. Just like standards, we don't want specification-based standards, too detailed and so on. As far as possible, we would like to have performance-based standards, and technical regulations as well should look at the objectives on the basis of performance, not detail. The plastic pipe for potable water should be gray or should be blue or should be green or anything. It should be safe and so on. So I think performance as opposed to specification. Now, when different national standards referenced in technical regulations in different countries exist, then and these countries want to converge and remove all barriers to trade and so on, they may request also in AFSEC to develop an African standard, and then they withdraw the national standards that are referenced in their technical regulations and make reference to the ARSO and AFSEC standard. So by making reference to standard, how to say, the kind of regulatory harmonization becomes kind of a one step easier, probably. So this is a tool that is there for us to use and has to be put to use in the best possible manner. Now, developing, applying, and enforcing TRs, it has been mentioned before my presentation, is a combination of law and technical specifications. Lawyers and technical experts, they haven't been to the same university, they don't speak the same language and so on. But for them to be able to work together and create technical regulations that is good for everybody, there should be convergence of the two sets of knowledge with both regulators and standardizers. That's why I think regulators need to understand quality infrastructure issues, standards and so on, and standardizers have also to understand about the legal issues. I remember in Mauritius at one point in time, all the directors of the public departments were trained by the Solicitor General's office in legal drafting. When technical, I was director of accreditation service, so I was dealing with the law and so on. And it was necessary to know how the law on accreditation should be drafted for it to be according to legal jargon, to legal objectives and so on. So I think this is also important. So not only regulators, but standardizers have to understand the issues about technical regulations and standards both at the same time. And there may be, of course, standardization needs specific to Africa that would not be met by international standards organizations' mandate. There might be a product, something like, I don't know, Karité or Shea butter, beurre de Karité, for which a standard might be needed, and ISO or anybody else doesn't, or Codex don't have the mandate to prepare standards on that. So I think trade on these specific African products probably exist and will continue to increase. But then we don't have international standards, so we have to go to our regional standards organization, also AFSEC. So these are kind of the challenges for you to think over. These are the things that we have to tackle as we go along. So thank you very much, and if there are questions, I'll be glad to take them up. Thank you. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Budo, for that very elaborate presentations and contributions that you have highlighted. In fact, the issue of standardizers and regulators working together, because at the end of the day, these are two sides of the same coin. In fact, he said that standardizers should know what is being regulated and regulators should know what is being standardized, because the reference into standards will finally affect the outcome and the implementation of that regulation. Thank you very much also for highlighting what is happening in Africa in terms of regulatory convergence, what the African leadership has done in terms of approval of an African quality policy, and what the technical team currently under PACI and as being supported by PTB, and also as being also guided by the African Union, the development of the ACTREF to ensure that the regulatory systems in Africa is uniform to avoid different regulatory systems. I had two questions for you, but one already I think you have covered very well in terms of the scenario you see in regulatory cooperation, harmonization, and convergence in Africa under the FCFT, and that's where the African quality policy has come in through the African leadership and PACI and then also the ACTREF, which is currently being finalized, as in the final stage. You have made reference, and this one is the other question, about the best way to do reference to standards so that we avoid making every standard mandatory, every technical or making every standard a mandatory standard, because the way we do referencing to standards make them mandatory. So I just wanted you just to highlight in one or two words the best way to make reference to standard and technical regulations so that we avoid making the mistake of making each and every standard mandatory. So implementation become an issue, because once it is a technical regulation, depending on how it has been referenced, then you realize that the standard becomes mandatory and it becomes a challenge to most of the SMEs in Africa. Kindly, if you can just highlight that in few seconds, then we go to the third panelist. Thank you very much once more for the elaborative presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. I think the question is very important, how we reference it. So I mentioned there are different ways of referencing standards. I think if you do direct referencing, then the standard becomes mandatory, and when the standard changes, the technical regulation has to change as well, and it's not easy to do that. So I think there is a preference over across the board to use indirect referencing, where you refer to a standard that is on an official list and so on. So the technical regulation itself doesn't quote the standard. It refers to an external list on which the standard to be used is placed. It's just like the official journal of the European Union. They do the same thing for indirect referencing, and my colleague will talk about that a bit just after me, maybe on that one. So I think that would be the best way to go, I think. So I think all this has to be put in place and so on. And again, we are tackling something at the level of Africa with so many countries, with so many different things, different languages, different legal systems. I mean, the French legal system and the British legal systems are not exactly the same, the way they run. The standards bodies in the French country don't run the same as the integrated standardization in the English-speaking body. So we have really a melting pot of so many possibilities and things. And I think the biggest challenge is to how to make all this work. If it's possible, objectives that we are pursuing, and not at the mechanics of how standards and technical, what do they contain in terms of how they are drafted and so on. If we harmonize the objectives, whether we are drafting standards, whether we are drafting technical regulation, then it is possible to bring all these countries together. So I think indirect referencing, I would say.
Thank you very much for giving that highlight, and also thank you very much for giving the prospective challenge. You already talked about state parties under the FCFTA, where state parties have reaffirmed their commitment towards the WTO in terms of making or guarding their citizens the issues of legitimate policy objectives that they have. So as you are talking, I think these ones are challenges which the African Quality Policy, the ACTREF, will help in resolving. Thank you very much. You make these suggestions. Yes, thank you. And we have our third EU, the Sensenelec. As I highlighted, the Sensenelec is one of our stakeholders that we as Africans, including the EU platform, the African Union platform, we learn a lot from. They have developed their single market. They have come across the challenges of regulations, and they have reviewed their policies in several ways. And it is a great opportunity to hear from the EU. We have Alberto Simeone, technical boards manager. He's with 14 years serving at UNI, the Italian standards body, as the head of relationships with the Italian government. He joined Sensenelec in 2014. He's currently account manager for the Sensenelec technical boards, the decision-making bodies on technical matters, with the following main task: on the coordination of SEN and Sensenelec technical policy, is responsible for the management of operations of Sensenelec technical boards, management of working groups related to technical policy matters, the driver for simplification and improvement of technical work, instructions and trainings to the network of technical officers on technical matters, and technical coordination with ISO, ICT, and ETSI on horizontal issues. And implementation of regulation is responsible for annual reporting on implementation of the EU regulations as highlighted, Sensenelec representative in the EU Committee of Standards and advisor on a key aspect linked to standardization request issued by the EC. Then the Secretary of ESO's EC Task Force to overcome issues related to citation of European standards. And I think these are great lessons as Africa is implementing the FCFTA and the issues of the convergence that we have just heard from the previous speaker, Mr. Bia, in terms of African quality policy and the active implementation. So he's going to make discussions on the sub-theme, measuring the link to trade barriers of standards and technical regulations and government policies in the European Union, guidelines for regulatory convergence in the preparation, elaboration, harmonization, publication, and application of standards and technical rules and regulations under the EU new standardization approach, that is 1985. So we are taking this opportunity to welcome you to make your presentations and contributions, and also to address any question that might directly be addressed to you in the chat box. Mr. Alberto, please, if you can take on the stage and share your presentation and make your contributions. Thank you and welcome.
Sure. Thanks a lot for this invitation. Thanks to ARSO for organizing this very interesting conference, and good afternoon to all the attendees. I hope that you can see my presentation now. It is on the screen.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, good, thank you. Just one slide to present the three European organizations for standardization that are commonly referred as ISOs. In Europe, we have ETSI, starting from the right to the left, so the European Telecommunication Standard Institutes. Then we have Senelec, the European Committee for Electrotechnology, and SEN. Basically, the split of the domains of interest of these three European standards organizations are similar to those of the three international standards organizations. So basically, ETSI is in the telecommunication sector as ITU. Senelec has the same competencies as IEC at international level, and SEN as ISO. You see that I put together SEN and Senelec because even if ETSI, SEN, and Senelec are three private, distinct organizations, SEN and Senelec decide to merge the stuff. So I serve both SEN and Senelec. I think it is important to have a first statement of the importance of standards as a tool to harmonize the market. SEN and Senelec are associations. So we have 34 members, and we go even beyond the European Union, because we include also countries like Turkey, Switzerland, North Macedonia, Serbia, and the main, I would say, one of the main strengths of the European standardization system is that one standard, the code of which is EN, European norm, once a European standard is published by SEN or Senelec, this has to be identically implemented in 34 countries, and any conflicting national standards have to be withdrawn. So this is de facto a great removal of technical barriers, because there is only one single standard which has been developed at European level with a consensus of our members that is implemented at national level. Standardization, of course, in Europe is a voluntary activity, mostly of private bodies. And therefore, standards are developed basically from the thanks to the expertise provided by industries. As a key role for the competitiveness of the European industry and contributes, there was a study measuring the contribution of European standardization in total GDP at the European level of 1%. Now, a huge boost for European standardization has been the Single Market Act of 1986, where the European Community at the time was the name, decided to go for an internal market to be completed by 1992. Of course, the benefit of a single market now are tangible. There are no more customs formalities. In Europe, we have even only one currency, so there are lower transaction costs. There is an access to products for more than 500 million consumers. These, all in all, enable a relevant growth of the European industry, or maybe I can say of European business. This single market, so you see there is a political will, a political bill create a boost for standardization. In particular, when this technique of new approach, it's called the new approach, was launched in the 1985. So this was basically a new legislative technique where the European laws were limited to define only the essential requirements, and mainly was for products. While the technical specifications were given to the European standardization organizations. So it was an important partnership between the public and private sectors, where the public limits its legislative intervention only to define essential requirements, when then the technical specifications were left to the standardizers. These technical specifications, once on the market, could be used by the manufacturers, and so the products manufactured in compliance with our standards benefit from presumption conformity to the legislation. So by using a European standards, the manufacturers could presume that its product is conform to the legislation. But very important, still the harmonized standards, the application of harmonized standards remains voluntary. So even if harmonized standards, so these standards that we produce in support of legislation provide the presumption of conformity, still they are voluntary, which means that the manufacturers in Europe can choose another technical solution in order to fulfill the essential requirements, because what remains mandatory are the essential requirements established in the European legislation. It is also interesting to see what I just explained. So standard as a market tool and standard in support of legislation, so as a support for as a legislative tool in the portfolio of our standards. So together, SEN and SENELEC, we have 23,000 deliverables. you can see that only a percentage, which is 15%, are drafted in support of European legislation. So still European standardization remains purely industry-driven. This is, I think, a nice, I want to leave it there, a nice picture to show how the technical harmonization helped also the European economy, in particular, removing the barriers to trade by setting requirements that are fulfilled can be fulfilled in different countries. Now, this legislative technique of the new approach that started in the 80s. So our cooperation with the European Commission, the European Commission basically is one of the main institutions of the European Union. In particular, is the institution with the legislative initiative in the European Union, and so is our main counterpart when the European Standards Organization have to discuss on policies or regulation. So I was saying that now we refer to the term NLF, which means a new legislative framework, to identify not only the new approach technique that remains, basically the principles of the new approach remains unchanged, and these concern standardization, but with the terms NLF, new legislative framework, we also include those legislative acts that have created the quality infrastructure, the European quality infrastructure. Basically, standardization together with accreditation and also the work of conformity assessment bodies and laboratories is part of the quality infrastructure, as explained in the first intervention today. So you may hear in Europe more frequent make reference to the NLF, which is, I would say, a further evolution of the new approach where elements concerning accreditation and conformity assessment have been introduced. Here we have on the screen the two legal acts. So today the regulation 1025/2012 de facto consolidate together 40 years of legislative cooperation between European standardization and the European institutions, and I want you to appreciate the fact that this European regulation, which means European law. So this is the first level of European law, and the regulation is applicable everywhere in the European Union without any need to transpose this European law into national law. So it's of direct application to any to everyone in the European Union. So this new regulation is really on European standardization. So there is a specific European law on standardization. This was amended in 2022, but only for certain aspects, which I will not explain because these are not relevant for today's meeting. I want to highlight that the regulation 1025 is about the cooperation between us, the ISOs, the NSBs, which are our members of the national standard bodies, the member states, and the European Commission. So the regulation 1025 is not the foundation act of SEN and SENELEC. It only establishes the ways of cooperation between us, our members, the member states, and the European Commission for the establishment of European standards or other deliverables for products and for services. Now, the word services has been clearly indicated in this legal document. and also cover the financing of European standardization, because even if in a small percentage the European Commission finance European standardization, and also have also some funding lines ad hoc for specific standards that are requested to support legislation, and also to promote a wide participation of, I would say, wide types of stakeholders in standardization, the participation of which is relevant. For instance, under this regulation, the European Association representing consumers, but also small business, small medium enterprise, but also environmental associations and also trade unions. So these organizations, these European organizations, are funded under this regulation, and they participate at the European level in the CEN-CENELEC technical work. Now, the success of this mutual cooperation between standardization and legislation, so this public-private partnership, is also certified by the number of sectors that in these 40 years of cooperation have been included in our activity in support of European legislation. So we started with machinery and I would say the electrotechnology sector, and also lift, rail, gas appliances, and then also now we have the e-accessibility for website, now chemicals, explosive, fertilizing products, construction products, then all what is the healthcare engineering, the measuring instruments, postal services, all the packaging where there is a very important element of sustainability. And then also specific standards in support of legislation for consumers, for instance, toys, personal protection equipment, and of course also the energy efficiency, together with low voltage directive, equipment for explosive atmospheres. So you can see that in a wide number of sectors, the European legislators has understood that standards can play a role and can help the implementation of European legislation. Here you can have also the websites. So now, how this new approach technique work? Now, I will try to not be, let's say, to be concise and precise in the same way. So the starting point is the European Commission exchanging with the member states, trying to identify what are the priority topics and policies for in Europe, and for which for these kind of topics, what can be the role of standardizers. If standardization is deemed capable to support the European policy legislation, then the European Commission, of course, after pre-discussion with us, issue a formal act, which are called the standardization request. So this is a legal act where the member states have the final approval within a specific committee on standards that is led by the European Commission, and the standard request de facto reflect the regulatory objectives of the Commission. The standard request is a legal act where basically CEN or CENELEC or ETSI are requested to draft a number of standards in support of a specific legislation by a set deadline, and also fulfilling specific requirements. So the policy requirements are contained in the standards request. And I will not hide that the the exchange with the European Commission when this request is under preparation are key, because it is important that what is requested in the standardization request is feasible for the ISOs, for the European Standards Organizations, of course, without jeopardizing the regulatory objectives of the Commission. So then when we receive officially these requests, our technical boards will vote whether to accept it or not. Once it is accepted, then Sen and Senelec, the first thing that they do, we always look at international level if there is anything that can be offered, because we recognize in Europe the primacy of international standardization. So it's better to have one international standard rather than a pure European standard. Of course, when at international level there is nothing available, then Sen and Senelec will develop European standards, will launch the technical work on that specific domain, where the European experts will contribute to the document. And one of the difference with a normal standards development is the fact that the draft standard, even before publication, is assessed by the consultants of the European Commission. So this assessment has the objective to ensure that the standards address correctly the requirements in the standardization request. Once the standard is compliant, then and therefore is published, then is offered, and we call it harmonized standards, is offered to the European Commission for the citation in the official journal. Once the standard is cited in the official journal, it gives presumption conformity to those manufacturers that use the standard in order to, let's say, produce their product and put their product in the market. They can CE-mark their product. When we mention the citation in the official journal, de facto it is a legal act of the European Union, so it is published in the official journal, and it is published as you see. So what is published is not the full text of the standard, but the standard reference together with the title of the standards. Then in some case we can have also dates, applicability date, and in some case we can also have some restriction to the use of the standards that are established by the European Commission if some parts of the standard are not considered, I would say, good enough to ensure the fulfillment of the requirements. So even if the standard is cited, as you can see on the screen, in the official journal of the European Union, this standard still remains of a voluntary application. So a manufacturer, so in this specific example here on the screen, where it is about the toys directive, so the European law on toys, for which we produced a set of standards for the safety of toys, a European producer, a producer based in Europe or elsewhere of toys, can either use this set of standards to show the compliance with legislation, or can use an alternative test report in order to show that that the toys are compliant with the legislation. Now, a key aspect, as we have seen from the previous slides, when the Commission basically exchange with the European Standard Organization for new standards requests, but also with the member states, is try as much as possible to anticipate future trends and topics, so future sectors where we can, where standardization can play a role. And so I think also for your organization is interesting to know that the European Commission has set up a group of experts under Commission responsibility, which is called the High-Level Forum on European Standardization. And here you can see there are participants from member states, European Standards Organization, industry, civil society, academia. They have defined at the moment three big chunk of work: green, digital, and resilience. And also they have observers from different bodies. What is important to understand is the contribution of member states, of national authorities in this forum, liaising with the European Commission and try to identify what are the priority topics in Europe for which European standardization can play a role. So this part is, I would say, relatively new. It has been set up end 2022, running 2023, but it is a very important element of improving a very early discussion on topics for standardization. Now, of course, I am available for questions, and also I want to say that we promote the adoption of European standards, the ENs, in third countries. In the presentation that, of course, will be distributed to all of you, you have also the reference, the contact point of a colleague of mine that can provide you more information whether your NSB is interested in adopting our standard. So, Philip, this is the end of the presentation. I give you back the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, and we appreciate so much. And as I just highlighted, the operation of a single market for which currently Africa is focusing on through the FCFTA, we have a lot to learn from the European Union. We like the idea of once adopted and once harmonized, member states are to withdraw the conflicting national standards. I think that one is very important and key for Africa. We highlighted the fact that the European Union Commission itself mandates Senelec to prepare the standards, and this is based on also members' contributions in terms of presenting the areas of interest where they want to see the standards. That one also qualifies when it comes to adoption and implementation of these standards. I also like the idea of what you have also highlighted, the financing of the standardization, which majorly lies with the EU and the regulations that it has set. So I think these ones are great lessons, and also the participation of the stakeholders in the standardization process, which is very key in terms of implementing those standards and to drive the single market in terms of trade. And I think those are some of the challenges that we still have in Africa, and why our intra-African trade is still low, because we see the types of different regulatory systems that we have based on standards, technical regulations, conformity assessment. And I think these ones are key lessons, and we are happy that currently we are at the African Union level. There is a lot of collaboration with the European Union in setting quality infrastructure in Africa. The questions also you have exhausted, because we wanted to highlight how the new standardization approach gives guidelines in the preparation of standards and technical regulations. You have highlighted that very well. the role of member states and other stakeholders in the formulation of the EU standards. Also, you have highlighted that very well. I'm only curious in understanding, and maybe also for the delegates who are here, under the African experts, how you make the European standards to become international standards, because at the end of the day, we are promoting global trade. The African standards also, especially the unique African standards, one day we are happy to see them become international standards. So we want also to get this perspective from you, if you don't mind, within a second or two, please.
Yeah, sure. As I said, the primacy of international standards is recognized even in internal regulation of SEN and SENELEC. So anytime we create a new work, we need to see first what is available at international level. We have the privilege to have two specific agreements with ISO and IC. These are called the Vienna Agreement and the Frankfurt Agreement. These agreements have the main objective to ensure that any international work which is relevant in Europe is taken into in consideration, and also the other way around, that we can scale up at international level when at European level we have defined some standards that can be of wider interest. I can make the example of the standards for the quality infrastructure. So if we take the ISO IC 17000, so these standards are the basics for accreditation, for the requirements also of the accreditation bodies, of laboratories. They come from European standard, the EN 45000 series, and I think it is a nice example of how these European standards were internationally recognized as useful. And once they became international standards, then we withdraw the old European standards, and we have adopted as EN ISO IC 17000. So indeed, it is very relevant, and also for the implementation. I see also there are some questions on the implementation at national level. We have, so first of all, when a European standard is published, a date, let's say, for the latest withdrawal of national standards is indicated in the European standard itself. So it means that when a new European standard is made available, the national standard bodies know that they have X months maximum to implement it, which means to add it in their national catalog and to withdraw conflicting standards. And they are bound to provide us with all national implementation, because we have a KPI, a key performance indicator, both towards our members, but also towards the European Commission, where basically 100% of EN has to be implemented by our members. So this is this figure is kept under great attention, because indeed the identical implementation of that standard is key for the European harmonization.
Thank you very much. And I think the takeaway there is EU directives on standardization. We look forward to a day where we'll have EU directives on standardization issues in Africa in terms of implementation development. Already we have a lot of decisions that come from EU on that affect the development and preparation of standard technical regulations. But we are looking forward to the next level, where we are going to have EU directive on standardization, so that we withdraw national standards, implement African standards. Thank you very much. And it was a great opportunity to have the EU and SENELEC with us here to learn from their insights and the road that they have traveled. Thank you so much. We will usher in our final panelists. This one is Mr. Kamara Mahefolo, a regulatory expert from UNIDO. Already had highlighted had highlighted that UNIDO, under the third industrial development decade for Africa, 2016-2025, had given UNIDO the authority of implementation, and UNIDO highlighted quality infrastructure as one of the components to see Africa through in this development decade. And we are glad to have Mr. Kamara to highlight the UNIDO experience, that what UNIDO is doing in terms of the issues of standards, technical regulations, that they have the authority and the mandate to do. Mr. Kamara is a specialist in quality and has some 15 years experience in the field of quality. Over the years, his work has focused on quality management systems, as highlighted. To this end, he is qualified as an auditor in several standards, as also highlighted the ISO 17025 series, even the ISO 22000 on the food safety. So I think we have a specialist here on quality issues that we are glad to have. And the skills have enabled him to hold successive positions as laboratory manager, quality manager, senior consultant in companies, consultancy firm and multinational company, respectively. Currently, Mr. Kamara works with UNIDO as an expert in quality promotion and quality infrastructure. In the context of his assignment with UNIDO, he has previously contributed to the successful implementation of 03 major projects related to competitiveness and quality infrastructure, including a national project in Cote d'Ivoire and 2 regional projects at the ECOWAS Commission, as highlighted. And Mr. Kamara is an agri-food engineer graduating from the prestigious Institute Polytechnic Felix. So it is our pleasure once more to welcome Mr. Kamara. Is going to make his presentation and contributions under the sub-theme, knowing why and when to regulate and when not to, using standards and technical regulations as instruments for avoiding unnecessary obstacles to trade through the principles of good standardization, regulatory and conformity assessment practices for trade success, and the need for increased cooperation among regulatory authorities and also with standardization bodies. Mr. Kamara, the floor is yours. We are at the indicated hour of stopping, but we still have the opportunity to extend a little bit to get the UNIDO perspective, because this is very key, as UNIDO is doing a lot of quality infrastructure development issues in Africa. Thank you very much and welcome. Thank you.
Philippe, as I said, I will present my presentation will be in English, but I will comment in French. Et comme je le disais, bonjour à tous, selon là où vous êtes. Je voudrais remercier ARSO d'avoir initié cette session-là sur des thèmes assez larges et qui nécessitent beaucoup de détails pour la compréhension de ceux qui ne sont pas habitués à ces activités-là. Ben, fort heureusement, les personnes qui ont intervenu avant sont vraiment personnes qui ont suffisamment un bagage intéressant dans ces activités-là et qui ont largement parlé des règlements techniques et des normes. Mais vous voyez que ce qui m'est confié ici, il s'agit des règlements techniques et des normes pour éviter donc les barrières non nécessaires au commerce à travers les bonnes pratiques de normalisation, de réglementation, de conformité, des procédures d'évaluation de la conformité, et aussi le besoin, la nécessité de la coopération entre ces organismes de normalisation et de réglementation technique. Ma présentation va s'articuler autour d'une introduction dans laquelle je vais donc relever le volet échange de ce thème-là. Et puis, j'avais prévu faire des définitions, mais les collègues ont déjà suffisamment débattu, présenté suffisamment largement défini ces termes-là, donc je ne veux pas revenir dessus. Mais je vais me focaliser sur les principes qui sous-tendent, bien entendu, les bonnes pratiques en la matière et puis relever juste un petit pan de l'interaction entre la normalisation et la réglementation technique déjà qui a été suffisamment étayée par l'un des collègues et puis surtout me baser sur l'impact que ces activités-là peuvent avoir sur le commerce, sur les échanges. Et puis, nous allons faire une conclusion pour faire en fait une ouverture sur les initiatives de l'ONUDI dans la région ouest africaine dans laquelle j'ai suffisamment travaillé avec l'ONUDI. Donc, en guise d'introduction, il est bon de savoir que la contribution de l'Afrique au niveau des échanges est de 3%. Ce taux est jugé très faible à cause du déficit d'infrastructures. Et puis, entre autres éléments également, il y a les biens non tarifaires. Or, les collègues ont déjà suffisamment parlé des barrières non tarifaires. Je ne vais pas m'attarder dessus. Mais il faut savoir que cela soulève le problème de les échanges, les libres-échanges et puis également du protectionnisme. Heureusement que des accords existent pour encadrer cela. Je le disais tantôt, je ne vais pas revenir sur la définition de la norme, des règlements techniques et puis de l'évaluation de la conformité qui ont été suffisamment déjà détaillés par les collègues. Mais ce qu'il convient de rappeler, c'est le caractère volontaire des normes et le caractère obligatoire des règlements techniques et les objectifs que ces activités-là visent. C'est l'objectif principal, la protection de la santé des consommateurs, de l'environnement et puis également la régulation du marché quand il y a défaillance. Ça, c'est l'élément essentiel que je voulais faire ressortir ici. Mais déjà, par définition, vous pouvez voir déjà l'interaction entre ces différentes activités-là. Je le disais tantôt, je vais me focaliser sur les principes qui sous-tendent les bonnes pratiques ici. Au niveau de la normalisation, vous voyez déjà comme principe, il y a je ne vais pas tous les citer parce que le temps, je crois que le temps court. Et vous avez la transparence, l'engagement des acteurs, surtout des parties prenantes, la cohérence et puis dans le processus de normalisation, il a encouragé de se baser sur des normes existantes au niveau international ou régional pour faire ces travaux-là. Bon. Également, vous retrouvez au niveau de la réglementation technique pratiquement les mêmes principes. On a la transparence, également l'harmonisation avec l'alignement avec ce qui s'est fait ailleurs, et puis également la base sur les normes internationales, tout comme les procédures d'évaluation de la conformité. Ce principe-là, vous voyez aisément se décliner déjà l'encouragement de la coopération entre les différentes structures, les autorités réglementaires, les structures de normalisation. Et entre structures de normalisation aussi, également, on parle de cohérence à ce niveau. Voyez-vous, même les structures de normalisation qui sont avec nous ici comme participants, vous savez que les normes, quoique développées au niveau international, régional, mais leur utilisation sont soumises à certaines conditions qui rappellent également la coopération. L'un des collègues a montré suffisamment de l'interaction entre les normes et la normalisation et les réglementations techniques, mais je vais sortir juste un pan pour dire pourquoi on a recours aux normes dans le processus de réglementation technique. Le recours à ces normes est vraiment avantageux parce que les autorités réglementaires vont déjà se reposer sur un existant qui fonctionne déjà. Et aussi, ça va permettre d'être sûr que ces documents qui sont élaborés sont déjà prennent en compte les principes qui sont édictés dans les accords de l'OMC et d'OTC qui permettent également les bonnes pratiques à la matière. Et aussi, pour moi, ça permet, vous savez, rédiger, élaborer une norme ou un règlement technique, ça peut prendre du temps. Surtout que s'il n'y a pas d'existant, il est requis que les autorités réglementaires se basent sur des éléments factuels et surtout sur des éléments scientifiques pour les élaborer. Déjà, donc, s'il y a de l'existant qui a fait déjà ses preuves, ça permet d'économiser en temps et d'avoir une réaction beaucoup plus prompte à certaines situations. Je prends justement le cas de la COVID ici. En Afrique, par exemple, si il n'y avait pas cette coopération entre les structures de normalisation, oui, c'est très difficile déjà pour certaines régions, surtout pour la région ouest africaine, de réagir face à la COVID. Parce que les bases normatives qui ont été mises en place, les bases réglementaires qui ont été mises en place ont été faites sur la base des normes qui existaient déjà au niveau de AFNOR et de l'ISO. Donc, du coup, ça a permis de réagir vite et de prendre des dispositions qui permettent de faire face à cette situation. Ça, c'est juste un exemple de coopération et qui montre vraiment que l'importance de se baser sur des normes internationales pour mettre en place des mesures ou même des normes au niveau national ou régional. Montrer cela va tout de suite faciliter la cohérence parce que déjà ces éléments-là ont fait déjà les preuves ailleurs et que tous les risques certains risques qui sont liés à leur application sont déjà évalués et choses. Mais ça n'exclut pas évidemment l'amélioration et la révision de ces éléments-là. Juste pour vous dire que la coopération est tout à fait importante dans le système d'élaboration des normes et de réglementation technique. Aussi, il y a un principe qui est commun, qu'on dit on ne refait pas la roue. On ne refait pas la roue. Et vous savez que les études scientifiques coûtent très cher, surtout les recherches scientifiques, ça coûte très cher. Et pourquoi pas mettre en œuvre cet élément de coopération pour faciliter la tâche à certains États donc, qui n'ont pas la possibilité donc d'aller de mener ces genres d'activités seuls. Et ça va être, non, ça prendra du temps et on gagnera en fait en temps et aussi en efficacité. Mais tout cela, comme on l'a dit tantôt, c'est encadré par les accords qui existent, notamment les accords de l'OMC et des obstacles techniques au commerce qui existent notamment sur ces aspects-là. Alors, l'un des éléments qui ressort dans le sujet qui m'a été soumis, c'est donc le succès, la contribution des règlements techniques et des normes dans le succès du commerce. Alors, il faut dire ici que ce succès peut se mesurer à partir ici de l'impact qu'on peut avoir, que ces éléments peuvent avoir sur les échanges. Pour la normalisation, il y a la commission de certaines estimations qui ont été faites par certaines services sociaux canadiennes de normalisation, qui a fait déjà des estimations, qui a montré que les normes impactent le commerce mondial, les échanges à hauteur de 80%. Ça, c'est très important à savoir. Et au niveau de la réglementation technique, il est admis que si un alignement est fait, une harmonisation est faite, les échanges peuvent s'accroître de l'ordre de 90%. Vous voyez comment, à partir de ces chiffres-là, on ressent l'importance de ces activités-là, les échanges, et montrer plus qu'on a intérêt à coopérer, à ne pas refaire la roue, à être plus consistant, à être plus cohérent dans ce que nous faisons, à être plus, je vais dire, pertinent dans ce que nous mettons en place pour faciliter les activités économiques. Et cela nécessite donc une coopération qui est recommandée comme recommandée dans les accords qui existent en la matière. Alors, pour aller vite en conclusion, pour ne pas, parce que je vois que le temps a court assez, mais je vais essayer d'être beaucoup plus bref dans ce que je vais échanger avec vous sur ce sujet-là. Il y a 77% du commerce mondial est affecté par les barrières, par les mesures non tarifaires qui comprennent également les normes et les règlements techniques et les procédures d'évaluation de la conformité. Cela montre encore plus que en termes de normalisation, de réglementation, de procédures de combat, nous devons ensemble, les structures doivent se mettre ensemble et parce que le rôle, ce n'est pas de gripper les activités économiques, le rôle, c'est de dynamiser les activités économiques dans les États et même dans les régions, au niveau continental, etc., pour permettre donc le développement de ces populations-là. Alors, pour l'harmonisation, pour l'élaboration des règlements et des normes, qui doivent se baser sur de bonnes pratiques pour assurer la compétitivité des produits, des services et accéder à des marchés beaucoup plus contraints. Et cela, c'est très important. Parce que s'il y a une ouverture, on se fait une ouverture, on coopère, on adopte des normes internationales sur les produits, les services, etc., on a possibilité d'accéder facilement à certains marchés-là sans contrainte, parce que les produits seront compétitifs sur ces marchés-là. Alors, donc, la coopération. La coopération est vraiment nécessaire, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, à travers les chiffres que j'ai évoqués tout récemment. La coopération est nécessaire, mais comment va se faire la coopération? Elle va se faire à travers, donc, les travaux au niveau régional, continental, la participation aux travaux au niveau régional, continental ou même international. Vous voyez déjà, cela est encouragé dans les accords parce que si vous ne faites pas votre ouverture, vous ne coopérez pas, vous ne pouvez pas voir ce qui se fait de bien ailleurs. Et vous serez toujours en train de perdre du temps, en train de travailler sur des choses qui ont été déjà faites, alors que vous pouvez les adopter directement et avancer et résoudre les problèmes qui se posent pays. Je prends le cas d'un pays que je ne veux pas citer, c'est qu'il y a un problème sur le riz, et qui n'avait pas de normes nationales sur le riz. Mais tout de suite, à partir de ça, du fait que ce pays ait été membre d'une organisation de normalisation, a pu adopter rapidement cette norme-là et faire face à ce problème des caractéristiques du riz qui pouvait être un problème national. Voilà un exemple de coopération qui résout des problèmes spécifiques et même des problèmes d'ordre général qui sont importants. Je peux encore citer d'autres exemples, notamment la grippe aviaire qui a secoué pendant un moment la région ouest africaine. Et cette grippe aviaire a permis à certains États de mettre des mesures dans leur pays qui ont permis donc de gérer cette situation-là. Mais ces mesures se sont basées effectivement sur certaines bonnes pratiques, certaines normes qui ont permis de notamment canaliser ce problème-là et de ne pas que ce conflit est tout un ampleur de santé. Voilà ces deux exemples qui montrent que la coopération est nécessaire dans le cas où vraiment on n'a vraiment pas la possibilité tout le temps de gérer seul certains problèmes ou même de développer certains règlements ou qui peut prendre du temps ou certaines normes également qui peut prendre du temps. Déjà même quand il y a de l'existant, ça au minimum on a 6 mois pour avoir certaines, ça je parle avec l'expérience en Afrique de l'Ouest. Mais déjà la procédure qui est mise en place au niveau régional de la CEDEAO, c'est minimum 6 mois, voire 1 année avant l'adoption complète d'une norme, le règlement technique avec. Voilà. Il y a aussi les accords de reconnaissance mutuelle qui peuvent permettre également la mise en œuvre de cette coopération-là, pour faciliter les échanges et pour faciliter certaines difficultés, pour lever certaines barrières entre les frontières, au niveau des frontières des États. Je voudrais, à partir de cette conclusion, rebondir sur certaines initiatives de l'ONU dans la région ouest africaine qui L'ONUDI, dans le cadre de ces activités de mise en œuvre de programmes au niveau régional, des programmes qualité, des programmes de compétitivité, a mis en place au niveau de la CEDEAO une infrastructure de la qualité qui comprend une agence de la qualité. Une agence de la qualité avec différents comités communautaires, dont le comité pour la réglementation technique, pour la normalisation, qui sont totalement opérationnels aujourd'hui. L'ONUDI également a favorisé la mise en place, développer des politiques nationales de la qualité alignées sur la politique régionale, et donc déjà parmi les 15 États membres de la CEDEAO, 15 ont déjà adopté ces politiques avec leur plan d'action qui prend en compte tous ces aspects de protection des consommateurs, de la santé des consommateurs, protection de l'environnement, etc. Il y a également, le MODI a permis à appuyer donc la CEDEAO à travers son programme, ses programmes qualité et compétitivité, à mettre en place une marque régionale de la qualité qu'on appelle ECOC Mark. Vous voyez, cette marque basée sur la conformité aux normes de la CEDEAO. Et ces normes-là de la CEDEAO, selon le processus, ont été basées sur des normes internationales ou des normes nationales qui ont été harmonisées. Du coup, ça fait la promotion des normes nationales, des normes de la région à travers cette marque-là. Donc, pour tout résumer, donc, vous voyez déjà que dans l'approche de l'ONUDI, les initiatives de l'ONUDI entend renforcer l'infrastructure régionale de la qualité et progressivement éliminer les barrières non tarifaires pour en fait contribuer aux nobles objectifs de la ZLECA en Afrique. Je vous remercie. Over to you, please. Allô? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much for the final presentation from Mr. Kamara. And I think this one, we started well in the very beginning. We have ended well. We have seen in the presentation elaborations on good regulatory practices, good standardization practices, giving us the differences in terms of the technical regulations and also the standards. You have highlighted one important thing here, that non-tariff barriers to trade, especially the technical measures, standards, technical regulations and conformity assessment, their effects on trade. It is 77% effects on the world trade. For Africa, I think Tralac study had put it somewhere to be 80 to 90, affecting intra-African trade. And the issues of non-tariff barriers, I've seen African leaders currently, when they make visits to the FCFTA Secretariat, one of the main highlights that they give is how do we tackle non-tariff barriers to trade, especially the technical measures in terms of standards, technical regulation, and conformity assessment. And that one is very key. I think you have brought up that one very, very, very closely home, how it affects intra-African trade. The issues of UNIDO's initiatives, I think, are also very key. And given the example of what is going on currently, where UNIDO is cooperating in the initiative of the African, Caribbean, Pacific regions, quality infrastructure development, and in this case also is also involved and touching so many African countries. And we want to thank UNIDO for these initiatives and continuous support to development of quality infrastructure in Africa, to ensure that non-tariff barriers to trade, especially the technical measures that we are discussing today, don't hinder the intra-African trade. On the same note, also, our panelists today have really done well in terms of plenary questions that we had for them in terms of the issue of when to regulate and not when to regulate, the issues of how standards and technical regulations affect SMEs, because when you highlight 77%, and we know that these ones are mostly concerned with the SMEs, you have also talked about the key regulatory and standardization practices. That ones were the questions that we wanted to highlight. I only wanted you to emphasize just a little bit when to regulate and when not to regulate. Must we regulate? Must we not regulate? Because countries have the prerogative of achieving their policy objectives in terms of human health, plant health, having quality and safe products. So when to regulate and when not to. And there sometimes we say, no, we don't regulate. And when it comes to that, what else do we do? Are there other alternatives? Kindly, maybe in a second, if you can just highlight on that. Thank you.
Merci Philippe pour cette préoccupation. Quand est-ce qu'il faut réglementer, quand est-ce qu'il ne faut pas réglementer. Vous voyez déjà par définition de la réglementation par définition même inclut cette réponse-là. Vous voyez, on normalise, on réglemente pour résoudre des problèmes. Lorsque ces problèmes sont maîtrisés, ces aspects sont déjà maîtrisés, soit par la mise en œuvre des normes et des règlements techniques, et que les mises en œuvre ne sont plus pertinents en ce moment, ce n'est plus nécessaire de les garder en état. Donc, il n'y a pas vraiment de problème en la matière. Il n'y a pas de problème, on ne peut pas forcément faire de normes pour les faire. Mais, dans le cas où les normes déjà existent, et les règlements existent, comment les gérer? Alors, je prends le cas de la grippe aviaire, comme je l'ai pris tout à l'heure. Les mesures entreprises dans ce cas-là pour gérer la situation. Et une fois que la situation a été maîtrisée, a été sous contrôle totalement, ces mesures ont été retirées justement. Donc, dès l'instant où vous n'êtes pas, un État n'est pas, ou bien une autorité ne voit pas déjà une nécessité de protéger la santé des consommateurs, de protéger l'environnement, d'avoir une nécessité de réguler le marché à partir d'un problème, ce n'est pas nécessaire de réglementer. Ce n'est pas nécessaire en somme de réglementer. Voilà ce que j'ai pas dit sur ce sujet-là.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hitting it onto the point, when to regulate, when it becomes a public health risk. And this one also tells us the importance of regulatory cooperation between regulators and standardization bodies or standardizers. Thank you very much, and we want to take this opportunity to thank all our panelists. We want to take this participants for taking all this time to be with us. I'll be sharing my screen just shortly on the conclusions. If you can see my screen on the conclusions, we had this opportunity right now to talk about the chat box questions. The chat box questions and any other activities, raised hands and responses. But due to time, we are not going to have enough time on this.
Recording stopped.
I think most of this has been highlighted by our panelists very, very well. We wanted to take this opportunity to thank the panelists, and I wanted to request them just before then. About the impacts. We have already seen all that. Then I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce our 44th webinar that we will be having together with the Zambia Bureau of Standards, and we have the Zambian Bureau of Standards Executive Director. Conformity assessment, you will see that for the last 3 months consecutively now, February, March, and April, so March, April, and May, we have been very much consistent in terms of technical measures that affect trade in Africa, standards, technical regulation, conformity assessment, and then the issues of SPS and TBT measures, where we discuss the TBT and SPS agreements. So our final journey in these discussions and contributions will be on conformity assessment on the 29th May that we are going to co-host together with the Zambia Bureau of Standards. And we look forward to your participation once more again to see if it is certified, if it is inspected, if it is tested, then it is ready for the market, and then also the activities that they are in. So welcome for the May session on the 29th, and we are going to publish the webinar accordingly. We will also take this opportunity to welcome all the stakeholders and member states to our 30th General Assembly meetings that will be taking place in Abuja, Nigeria. We have done the notifications, but we want to highlight this respectively. And the theme will be Educate an African Fit for 21st Century, Building Fully Infrastructure and Culture in Africa, One Market, One Standard. The theme, as I highlighted, based on the AU theme for 2024 Year of Education, that educate an African fit for the 21st century, building resilient education systems. And you know the role of standardization in ensuring that we have a quality of graduates that we need, that will face the market, will be entrepreneurs, will be policymakers, will be economists, and will be the trade decision makers, and where standardization will always feature in political, economic, and trade policy issues. So I wanted to highlight that. We just want to come back and finalize, and I want to take this opportunity now to give our respective panelists just 1 minute opportunity to present their takeaway, final word to the delegates, and final word on this topic and theme. So if I start, I will start with is Mr. Ruben still with us? He was in a meeting and in South Africa. Seems Ruben is in a meeting. We have Dr. Carl. Dr. Carl, if you can just have 1 second to highlight a takeaway or a final recommendation on this theme and topic. Mr. Dr. Carl?
Well, very rapidly, I think it was a very interesting discussion, and the presentations were very well done. What I would like to underline is that the development of standards is a good theme, because, well, at least what are our experience in Latin America, we are taking first, like also Alberto has said, we look for the international standards first. And if there is one standard not existing, then we will try to do it. And it's also so indifferent to Senelec that Cobant is not developing regional standards, which afterwards were international standards, because they decided they will accept first the international standards, and they will try to help the national standardization bodies to have the contact and the information by especially by ISO, ISC, and ITU. The last thing, what I would like to say, that there are only few examples of harmonized regulation. So we have it in Europe. We have it in North America, including Mexico, and then we have this example of Central America. generally, it's a difficult problem, and I would subline at least what is our experience in Latin America. There are two main problems. The first is the awareness of the necessity to have quality infrastructure institutions which are working well and are responding to the necessities of regulation. This is one point. And the other point is that the main problem, what we were confronted, is the lack of technically competent testing laboratories in the case of conformity assessment bodies. And what we did in regulation when we were working there, that we are trying to support the development of competent laboratories, and also to see how we can with PDB help to develop the competences of these laboratories. And we had some very good experience in the case of Colombia. This is what I would say at the end of this webinar by mine.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karl, for that final punch on basing technical regulations on harmonized standards or international standards. Then also the issue of having effective quality infrastructure for regulations and regulatory activities, and the fact that the institutional capacity building in terms of labs are very key. Thank you very much. We give Mr. Beer the second opportunity to make a takeaway and recommendation. Kindly, Mr. Beer, please.
Thank you, Philip. I think the time, we are very interesting time now that the AQP is being implemented. The AQP Council is working. It has 2 meetings. All the PACI institutions are involved in the governance. They are involved in the AQP Council, and AFCFTA Secretariat has been roped in the effort to provide the continental technical regulatory framework. I think all the pieces of puzzles are falling in place slowly, and everybody is very much aware of where we are going and how we are going to go about it. And I think webinars like this is very, very, very useful to build the awareness around these issues, to inform colleagues that there are things working on, and they will have to contribute something at some point in time when the things are implemented fully fledged. So I think very interesting times, very, very positive signals and momentum. So I think the time is very, very right. So let's all work on this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the highlights. Yes, the regulatory convergence that is happening in Africa, make sure that we don't have the divergent regulatory systems that has been a problem in this case, and the involvement of all stakeholders. And we must thank the African Union for the political goodwill in terms of even adopting the African quality policy. And that is very key, and also for the facilitation of the FCFTA and the role the FCFTA Secretariat is now doing, and the role of PACI and the PACI institutions bringing us both all together. Then awareness creation is also key, and that is what we are doing in our monthly webinar session, so that we reach all the stakeholders, and we even reach also to the political leaders to ensure that they understand the issues that we have. Thank you very much, Mr. Beer, for elaborating that. We are giving the next opportunity now to Alberto Simeoni, and the final word and the lesson from the EU and Sensenelec. Mr. Alberto, please.
Yes, thank you, Philippe. Thanks again for this invitation. I would say that it is very important to improve cooperation with the legislators. And of course, these can be seen as a follow-up of what just I presented. So with the Sensenelec at the European legislator, but I think you can also apply this concept at any level. Also at national level, it's very important. The national standard bodies, they have good cooperation with their national authorities. and with a clear distinction of roles between what the public sector has to do and what the standardizer can do, and also a general call that at the end what we want to have are good standards, and good standards are achievable thanks the good experts. And so the last I would say call that I would do is try to find the right experts at national level, because these are those that can write useful standards, useful at national and European level. In your case, regional level.
Thank you very much for the final word. And what we get from the EU for Africa is the cooperation, and especially with the legislators, and these are policy makers, and already have highlighted the African Union Commission, and looking forward to a day that we will be having the African Union directives on standards development. The issue of having capacity building for the experts, so that we ensure that from the national level, we have standards that have been well developed, because one of the problems that we have is making use of badly developed standards, which are not developed according to the principles that were highlighted. And I think finally, public and private sectors cooperation is also key. Thank you very much, and lessons from the EU for Africa are well underlined. Thank you. Let us have final word from Mr. Kamara as the takeaway. Mr. Kamara, please.
This session gives an opportunity for us to raise an important link between standards and technical regulation and their impact on the trade. Donc, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, ces échanges, l'impact important des échanges sur les normes et les règlements qui sur les échanges amène à comprendre qu'il faut d'importantes dispositions à mettre en place au niveau de nos pays africains, et surtout au niveau du continent, dont les niveaux des pays ne sont pas les mêmes. Du coup, les collègues tout à l'heure ont relevé le problème du renforcement des capacités, bien sûr. Ça, c'est très important parce qu'on parle d'harmonisation, donc il faut harmoniser le niveau de compréhension des choses à travers le renforcement des capacités des experts qui sont déjà initiés à cela. Je voudrais encore aller plus loin en disant qu'il faut des infrastructures régionales pertinentes, une qualité régionale pertinente qui peut booster des infrastructures qualité nationale qui pour permettre à ces États-là de faire face à ces défis-là. Voilà ce que j'aimerais dire sur ça, en plus de ce que les collègues ont déjà dit. Merci. Over to you.
Thank you very much once more, Mr. Kamara. Thank you very much, Mr. Kamara, on the issue of the final word, the issue of harmonization, so that not all countries are at the same level, but we need to have one standard, one market accepted everywhere in terms of the one which fits all in terms of their development levels. Capacity building, this one has also been highlighted by the EU. We need to continue doing capacity building from the national level, regional, and also continental level. And already we thank UNIDO for doing this, because there's a lot of capacity building within this week and last week. I think UNIDO have done a lot in terms of capacity building of the African experts. We have another capacity building event which is coming and targeting the quality policy or quality experts. There's a training the trainers on quality policy issues and quality infrastructure, so that it can be cascaded below to the other different levels. I think this one should be on the week of 20th to 25th May in Accra, Ghana. So capacity building, and what UNIDO is doing in Africa It's really commendable. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, delegates. It was a great opportunity to have you in this webinar session. What we want to highlight now, and Mr. Dan, I'll request our IT team, and I request all the delegates who are still here, let us have a photo to commemorate this webinar and this day. It was a real great opportunity for us all. Let us have our cameras on. We will say this one was a webinar on technical regulations.